Hey, I want to welcome everyone for joining us today. I hope y'all came from the storms okay. Um, I am Stephen Procopio. I'm the president of the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana. We're a nonprofit research and organization and watchdog. Um, we're here to talk about constitutional conventions. There has been a lot of discussion about constitutional convention, a lot of interest from PAR, but I know others, a lot of excitement, a lot of concerns from others, and a whole lot of questions, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Um, and we have the perfect panel to do that. We have Representative Beaullieu, Chairman of the House and Governmental Affairs Committee and sponsor of the convention bill. So he'll be able to answer all our questions. And then we have uh, Jim Tucker, former House Speaker and one of the governor's representatives in promoting the convention. And joining us shortly will be Senator Katrina Jackson-Andrews. In addition to her, time spent at the legislature, she is also a practicing attorney. So that will be handy for us to have as well. A little bit on format. Melinda and I will start off with some questions just to kind of get the ball rolling. And then after that, we will turn it over to y'all. So put your questions in the chat, put your questions in the question and answer, and then we will get to them. Melinda will read through them and sort of typically tend to be multiple questions, and we'll paraphrase it into one or restructure it to make it a little bit more succinct. I will tell you, we normally do not get to all the questions that people ask. And I think that's probably going to be even more true on this one. I've already had people email me in advance questions, and we typically don't have that happen. So with all that, get your questions in the sooner the better. And reminder, this will be on YouTube, so you can catch it there. I also know there are a lot of questions about process and details. One thing we've done, and Alex, if you could put it in the chat, we put together like a little infographic. It's just a one-pager. It's like who's going to be part of the convention, what is the timeline, what's on and off the table. Very high level, though I suspect we still have a lot to talk about in terms of process. So with that, let's start off. Chairman Beaullieu and Jim, if y'all could maybe both talk about why are we having a constitutional convention? What's the purpose and what do you want to see accomplished? Maybe Jim, do you want to start first?
Sure, I'll start. Thank you first, Stephen and Melinda, for having me and for hosting this. It's important that everybody understand what the overall opportunity is here and why I feel so strongly about moving forward with it. I come at it from a historical perspective. 35 years ago, I was the Director of Municipal Research at Howard Weil. And with the failure of the Roma reform package, I wrote a report to our investors across the country that said basically, until we fix our systemic structural problems, most of which are in the Constitution, we would always face a roller coaster of wealth and loss, highs and lows in the budget process and in the fiscal condition and budgetary conditions within the state. And that's been borne out, but for natural disasters or oil spills, we've had very little economic growth naturally, and really it's at a point now where the Constitution has so much tied up in it that without getting it fixed, we are going to be unable to move forward and have this state at this point catch up to our other Southern peers. So I feel very, very strongly that this is the way we have to go. To Governor Landry's credit, he's the first governor that I've had a chance to serve with that has been willing to pick up this baton and try to move it forward. And so I'm very appreciative of his effort.
Thank you. Chairman, what about you? What do you hope to see out of this, and why are we having this constitutional convention?
Yeah, former Speaker Tucker did a good job at summarizing it, but to be real specific to some of his items, from a timing standpoint, I think the idea of having a governor that's in support of it is important, and so that is it's an important time to do it when you have someone at the top that's really pushing it in favor of it. So we don't talk about that a whole lot, but to Jim's point, that's important to do it while the iron's hot. The other part that we know that we're expecting a $500 million budget shortfall next year, and I came in after they had the shortfalls in 15, 16, 17 with the penny sales tax, and then the was left with the 0.45 part of the sales tax right now. And the horror stories that I hear, but I do remember reading and following everything that was going on at the time. And our flexibility as a legislature is or our ability of the legislature to be flexible is very much limited because of the constraints of the Constitution. Our discretion, the discretionary part of our $48 million budget is $3.8 million billion dollars, if I'm not mistaken. $48 billion is $3.8 billion. So when we start talking about a $500 million shortfall coming out of that 3.8 billion, it's tough to maneuver. So I think it's important to go through this process and to give us, to untie our hands. Our people back home are asking us, hey, we want you to make bold changes. We want you to change the trajectory of the state. But we can only do it with a small part of the budget and a small ability or limited ability to maneuver when it comes to overall comprehensive reform.
That's great. Let me do a process question here. I want you to kind of, particularly you, Mr. Chairman, if you could walk through the proposed calendar of how it would work, and if you could pay particular attention to how citizens will have public input. Where do they get to have their say, and how this is supposed to work? I know this is not settled, and there's still lots of things in flux, and a lot has to be determined. But in terms of your vision, how you see it, how is this supposed to work, particularly the committee section and particularly public participation?
Yeah, so when we originally drafted the bill, we talked about coming in the last 2 weeks of session, and our intention was to have our committees actually vet different articles in the Constitution. And as we got busy, we realized that might be difficult. So we amended the bill to where now it says that we would gavel in at the beginning of June, end of May, sometime when this session is ending, and we'd go into the convention. And only reason we'd be going in at that time is to give the committees of the convention or a committee of the convention the ability to take public input and to hear the people of Louisiana and what their thoughts were, what their hopes of the new Constitution would look like, and what their concerns were as well. So in my thoughts, you'd probably get somewhere in the middle of June after the legislators had a little bit of a break, and we'd start having some committee hearings, and those committee hearings would be televised online, just like our existing ones are now in the session. And it would also give the public the ability to testify in person if they would like to do so. And we would do that in June and July, and have multiple opportunities for people to voice their opinions. And then we would come in a full assembly of the convention at the beginning of August. And so at that point, we would have, again, some committee structure that would allow public input and would all be accessible to the public online as well. And we would do the official business of the convention at that time with creating the new Constitution or the refreshed or revised Constitution.
Okay, great. Jim, do you have anything you want to add to that in terms of how you see how this could work or should go?
No, I think Beau said it correct. I mean, there will be public participation in this project. I think it'll happen in the interim, in the June-July timeline, yet to be determined exactly how. And remember, that's one of the things that's kind of a chicken and an egg in this whole thing with the bill. And the legislature wants to give direction, but at the end of the day, the delegates have to decide how this is going to be structured and how this is going to be move forward through the August timeframe. But it's clear to everybody that's involved, we desire to have as much public input as possible and plan on making sure that there's adequate opportunity for participation.
Okay, great. And I know the senator's trying to log on right now, but I'm going to turn it over to Melinda. We're starting to get a lot of questions, and we have one or two we also want to ask before that. But when she gets on, we already have questions for her. So Melinda, why don't you ask the next question?
Okay, so I think I'm going to be the bearer of bad news. Senator Jackson-Andrews is very sick, and she was going to try to log on via audio, but that seems like it's going to be too much for her. She has a stomach virus. So anyway, so she sends her apologies, but I don't think we're going to be able to get her on the webinar today. So Jim and Beau, you're going to be the point people on this one. So I'm going to start with sort of a broad question, which is, are there examples of something that you see in the Constitution currently that you believe should be moved to statute instead of staying in the Constitution? Because obviously, Chairman Beaullieu, you would be a delegate as a member of the House, and Jim, you would be, you're one of the governor's proposed appointees as a delegate. So can you just provide an example of something you think shouldn't be in the Constitution anymore?
Jim, you want to take the lead?
Well, I would say that there are, when you look at what's in the Constitution, and let's talk about, before I get there, let's talk about what should be in a Constitution. If you take the U.S. Constitution as the ultimate model, what is in the U.S. Constitution is simply the inalienable rights of the individual citizen of the United States, along with a general, very general structure of government. Everything else is left to federal statute to be dealt with by the Congress and the executive branch on any particular type of issue. That's not the way we have it in Louisiana. In Louisiana, all but, as Beau just said, 8% of the entire financial angle of the government is tied up in the Constitution. Mandated expenditure, mandated revenue source, mandated taxation, all of those things are tied up and out of the reach of the people's representatives in the legislature and through the executive branch through the governor. So in my perfect world, you would have the mirror image of the U.S. Constitution in Louisiana, because it would give the representation that the people elect every 4 years the opportunity to go in and reflect the desires of the people at that point in time. You have elements in the Constitution, particularly in the funds area on the financial side, that are not allowed to be able to be administered properly in a 21st century context. Some of them go back to the 1921 Constitution. And so there are funds in particular that I would say that we could be more efficient with, we could meet the needs of the people with, and that would be better served directing to current needs and expenditures in this state that are currently tied up in things that go back in history that don't necessarily reflect where we are today.
Yeah, and like I'll follow up on that as well. So what Jim's talking about on the fund side of it, but also on the tax side of things. So when we're trying to balance a budget and create reform from a tax standpoint, we can only deal with one side of the equation, and that's the equation that's in statute. And you all know there's a lot of exemptions and credits and all this built into statute. And sometimes in order to change those, you have to have the other side of the equation too, which is those items locked up in the Constitution, which are a bunch of other funds and taxes as well. And it's not that there's any one particular fund or tax that I would say you're going after. It's the idea that when you go into a reform mode, that you can work with both sides of the equation. And I know that's getting kind of granular, but when you're only dealing with part of it in the statute, it's hard from a negotiation standpoint, from an equity standpoint, to be able to balance everything out. Your cigarette taxes are locked in the Constitution. I mean, that's something that should be in statute. I mean, it's just an idea, and I'm picking on that one because it's a low-hanging fruit. But why would cigarette tax be in the Constitution? And I know there's a reason, but it should be in statute. But so, I mean, that's kind of an example. And we have probably $10 billion in funds that are sitting there, some of them being used, some of them not. Actually, I think it's closer to 18 billion, but in particular protected funds, you got about $10 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And they're all going for good cause, but when we have budget shortfalls and whatnot, to be able to even the flow, and maybe we don't need to put into a fund as much one year while we're balancing budgets and whatnot, and we can pick up on it in another year. And we also want to make sure that all these funds are being used and used efficiently while we're asking people to pay taxes and sometimes more taxes, like the 0.45. We have to be able to show that the monies that we do have sitting in savings are being used efficiently, and we're not just constantly going back to the people for more money when we have adequate money sitting on the side.
Right. And let's be clear about one thing too, because I actually saw a television ad last night by a group that I'm not that familiar with, but whose facts are just wrong. This is not a rewrite of the Constitution. The governor has not proposed that. In fact, when the transition team for the governor came together, we realized very quickly that those who argued if you're going to redraft the Constitution, that's a 2-year process and gets very deep into a lot of things. We don't have that kind of time or effort available to us at this point in time to deal with the Constitution. What is being proposed, and if everybody listening hears nothing else but this today, I think this is the most important thing I can tell you, is that we're not proposing on changing a single term within the Constitution. We're only talking about moving out of what should be, as I described a few minutes ago, what I believe is should be in the structural portion of the Constitution, or the inalienable rights and the general formation of government, and leave that in the Louisiana Constitution. And in my perfect world, move everything below the line for then a transition section of the Constitution to be created, whereby with a 2/3 vote of the legislature, sometime in the future, issue by issue, debated deeply and researched efficiently and appropriately, decisions can be made about specific things that need to be addressed within the Constitution. But all we're doing now is trying to unlock what is locked up in the Constitution to give future legislators and budget folks the opportunity to deal with things.
Jim, I think that provides a lot of clarification. It's a shame that the center couldn't join us, because I think that would be good to have a Democrat on here as well. But I will say there are a ton of great questions, fair but tough questions in there. So why don't we go and catch a few more of those?
Right. And there seem to be a lot of questions sort of about the idea of creating parameters of what can and cannot be discussed. And so obviously there are legal questions about whether or not the legislation can create limitations on what the convention can discuss. And now you've had a couple of the governor's proposed delegates say that they didn't believe that whatever was in the bill would confine them to those parameters. So what do you tell people who are antsy that even if y'all have put it off limits in the bill, it still may seem like something that people will be debating at the convention? Do y'all intend to stick to the parameters of the bill?
So Jim, I'll jump on this one. Look, so I get it. I mean, and especially in Louisiana politics, you're going to have people who talk on both sides of a lot of things. There's a court case, a Supreme Court case back, I think in 21 Constitution, where they went outside, or maybe a previous one. I don't remember which one of the Constitution, where they went outside the parameters of the bill, and they threw out all of those items that were attempted. I can tell you what the will of the governor is, and I can tell you what the will of the legislature is, and that's to stay within the realms of House Bill 800. So I don't know what else to say. We have legal advice from both sides, and so I'm not an attorney. I can tell you what the will of the legislature is, and our plans are to stick with it.
And let me add to that, Melinda, because
let me frame it a little bit. How do you control for that in the convention? How do you make sure delegates stick to that?
Well, I think you're going to have processes and rules in the convention to where, I mean, look, the first item of the convention could be to adopt House Bill 800 and the parameters, and you're done with that. And I mean,
that's exactly right.
Do it in the convention, and it's settled when it's fresh in everybody's mind.
Right. That's right. And I think that's exactly what we will do. And I will go further to say, as I said a minute ago, in Jim's perfect world, we'd move everything below the line, but we don't live in a perfect world. And this is not a perfect situation. This is a political situation as much as it is a constitutional situation. And so we recognize that there are things that the public do not want to be fooled with. And we've taken a lot of those off the table in HB 800, as Chairman Beaullieu has handled it extremely well. But I can tell you, absolutely, from the governor's perspective, he's made a commitment to honor what is going to happen out of HB 800. And as a delegate, I too am saying, I'm not going to do anything that the legislature doesn't allow. And so I think collectively, the public can take comfort that it's not just one person or two people, it's everybody agreeing and the legislature having voted on what is in HB 800. And so I don't see us getting out of bounds, if you will, of what the bill allows once we get to the convention. I think that that's a scare tactic by people who don't want us to go, in my opinion, in a lot of cases. And I don't think it's worthy of the debate.
Let me ask you a follow-up question.
Let me make one more point just on vote thresholds. If we have a supermajority of the House and a supermajority of the Senate that say this is the parameters of the bill, we can control the convention with our votes. And so we agreed to it in the session. We can control it in the convention. So when you ask how you can control it,
Right.
it controls it with votes, and this is what we've agreed to.
Yeah, it's a red herring, quite frankly.
Well, and somebody points out that there was an article in the paper today where the governor seemed to suggest that the MFP, the K through 12 funding formula, might be up for discussion in the convention. Is that something?
Yeah, so I mean, I read something, a reporter had sent me, the reporter who was working on that had sent it to me, and I didn't see the governor's quote, but when we added the parameters of the MFP to be off limits in the bill, the governor was part of that discussion. So he was in agreement that the MFP would be off the table as an amendment. So for them to extrapolate that the governor is saying we're changing the MFP, I think the governor's point was there's plenty of opportunities when we take off the handcuffs that exist in the Constitution. There's plenty of opportunities to have some flexibility for spending purposes. I don't think it had anything to do, and I don't think the governor said that he was planning on going into the MFP in his quote based on what I read.
So it's your commitment from both of you, just to be clear, so everybody can feel comfortable. It's your commitment that neither one of you would be interested as delegates to go into the MFP and have a discussion about that, since it's already in the bill is off the table.
That's correct.
That's correct. But I will tell you this, that's absolutely correct. Short answer. Longer answer is I challenge anybody to explain the MFP to me. I've been trying to understand it for 30 years. It doesn't make any
webinar,
sense to me
Jim.
at all. That's more than a
webinar,
attended
one, by the way.
And look,
that's more than a webinar. I mean, it really is.
Look, I don't want to go into this, but I mean, what if there was a better funding thing for that? I mean, we're not going into the MFP, but you know, if because it's going to stay protected, but if you had it in stack, we might find a better funding source that the schools would love. But we're going to keep it the way it is, and we'll keep the same constraints the way it is to make everybody happy on the political side of things.
Right.
Okay, this is a question near and dear to Parr's heart about how can the public provide input in this process? And this person is asking, there's still not a plan in place for public participation, and this is being proposed for the June-July timeframe. So they're essentially wondering what opportunities will the public have to actually weigh in and make its suggestions? Will there be a calendar of committee hearings that people can attend? How will they know to plan?
I hung up with the governor's team earlier, and I've spoken on the legislative team. We're working on some processes now. President Henry has asked, us to kind of get some of that together, and so we're working diligently on putting together that timeline. But Jim, I know you've been in some of those discussions too. If you want to mention that.
Yeah, I think I nothing's set in stone today because there's still discussions going on with the Senate, and making sure that as we move the bill forward, that these issues are addressed in the Senate amendments that will certainly come to HB 800. But I would say very safely that there's going to be plenty of time. I would say at least 10 days of public testimony availability in June to discuss the Constitutional Convention, or June and July. I shouldn't say June, probably be June and July. But at a minimum, 1 day per article in public testimony and discussion is kind of where I think we may end up. We're both hesitant to say where we're going to end up because it ends up being the delegates who decide where we're going to end up. But as far as the proposal goes, the governor and his team have all said the same thing, and that is we want to have as much public input as possible, and we are committed to doing that as we move through HB 800.
Okay, we have a question about the delegate process. Will the governor be able to nominate delegates? Because it seems that some senators seem uncomfortable with that portion of the proposal. I believe some senators have been quoted publicly about questioning whether the governor should have delegates. Do y'all have a preference on that? Obviously, and in full disclosure, PAR's president, Stephen Procopio, would be one of the governor's selected delegates if the governor gets 27. So does the governor have a strong position on this? And do y'all have a strong position on whether he should have delegates?
So I don't have a strong position on it, but I do have a position. I mean, I think the governor should have a seat at the table. He's the one who's pushing this, and it was his transition team that, and I know both of these guys, or maybe all three of y'all on the transition teams. So I think he should have a seat at the table. At the end of the day, it's not like a make or break deal for me, but I believe in everybody having a voice, and I don't think those 27 delegates can go rogue when we have the greater remainder of folks in the House and Senate, to where we can still control it. If Jim decide he's going on a tangent with something, we can control him with the House and Senate delegates.
Right. And I would say this couple things for everybody's history. There were gubernatorial appointees in the 73 Constitution, 27 of them. That's where the number comes from in this case. There's nothing magic to it. We haven't, quite frankly, been able to figure out how they got to 27 in 1973, but it probably was part of a political process that got them, the governor, to have representation in the convention in 73. I think it's important that there are gubernatorial appointees. If you look at the list of folks the governor has suggested, exclude me, there are a number of people who come at this with an extraordinary sense of experience, both legislatively and life experience, that I think would be very, very important to have those voices represented in the convention. When you serve in the legislature, as I did between 2001 and 2012, it's a different place, and the bubble that you get into sometimes can consume you. I know it did for me. And so it's good to have those outside voices as a part of this process, and really bringing about additional public input. You know, the idea that we're the gubernatorial delegates, and therefore we're all decided on how we're going to be voting on things, and I don't see that being the case at all. One of my favorite constituents when I was in the legislature was Judge Bernadette Johnson. She's been appointed as one of the nominees by the governor to be a gubernatorial delegate. She's a wonderful person. She and I politically had very good conversations and very different positions on a number of different things. But she brings a voice to this process that I think is going to be very valuable, as I do believe all of the gubernatorial appointees will.
We have a question about supporters of the Constitutional Convention suggesting that voters shouldn't have to weigh in so much on amendments and amending the Constitution and constantly changing things. And whether or not, do you believe that Louisiana should remove the requirement that changes to the Constitution go to a public vote? Or do you think there should be other changes to amendment processes and changes to the Constitution?
So let me make sure I understood that question right. I absolutely think the voters of Louisiana need to be the final say-so on this Constitution, if that's what part of that question was.
That was part of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would never support this convention without having the people having the last say-so. I mean,
it wouldn't have any weight. I mean, it requires the people to vote in November, and I think that's another important point, real quick, and that is that we're going at this pace and to make the November election because there's not another statewide election until November of 2026, 2 years from now. So if we don't get this done now, we have to wait that long or call a special election at a very high cost and not have the participation. The governor has been very, very adamant about having maximum participation in the public's vote on this, and that always happens on a presidential election day. And so those were the kinds of things that guided us to the timeline of trying to make the November deadline, was so that the maximum number of people will be able to participate on from a voter perspective.
Let me follow up with a related question in terms of how we adopt constitutional amendments, because a lot of what this is about is taking things out of the Constitution and putting in statute. But there's one thing in the call that is not true. It is different. It is looking at how constitutional amendments are adopted in the future. And there are different items different states have. You might require more than a majority or some percentage of the popular vote, or, and this is PARS, I'm just throwing a quick thing, have to go through the process twice because we've seen a lot of constitutional amendments go through with very little discussion. So have there been much discussion about that, and where are y'all on looking at different methods for future constitutional amendments to maybe make it a different process or maybe a little bit more stringent?
So we've all discussed making it more stringent. So I mean, what the process would look like, we don't know. But I mean, part of why we in the spot we're in is because of the 200 and some odd amendments that have been added. So what it looks like, we're not sure. But you know, there has been some discussion about. You know, I had a couple of people say, "Hey, well, I don't know if we make it too stringent, we might not be flexible enough to you know, fix changes when we need them on a dime." But I mean, I think the people in Louisiana would prefer not to have to vote on these crazy worded constitutional amendments every time they get to the ballot box.
Jim,
Yeah,
anything else?
I completely agree with that. I think that the constitutional amendment process has been abused for decades, and we need to fix it some kind of way. And I think the convention will address it before it's over with.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
We have a bunch of questions about individual provisions in the Constitution, as I assume y'all would have expected, but a couple things that hit on the broader discussion of taxes. And obviously, y'all have talked about going into a fiscal year next year, the need to give this legislature more flexibility. If y'all are looking at income tax reform and next year is a fiscal session, are there specific changes to the tax rules in the Constitution that you see that need to be moved to statute? And to piggyback on that, somebody is specifically asking about the sales tax exemption on food, drugs, and home utility bills. Should that be moved to statute?
Yeah, I want to be careful when we do this, just because we don't know what the final Constitution is going to look like and what's going to be left in it. So people have asked, so what's the plan for the tax reform? And we don't know it until we know what's on the table as far as from a change standpoint. I'm going to answer this personally, not for the convention or for anything else, but I think all of those tax items should be in statute. Again, it's not because I think we need to necessarily have tax on food and for home consumption and whatnot, but if there's a better way to bring in revenue for the state, we need to be able to have that on the table. So I don't know if that's going to be left in we haven't really talked specifically about each item in particular, but on all of them, I would prefer to see them in statute. But again, this is a political process, and the political will say, no, hey, leave all that in the Constitution. So, I mean, we haven't gotten to that point, but I'd like to discuss it all.
Yeah. And if I can, let me drag this back. So to me, how you deal with individual issues is a step 2 conversation. Step 1 is what we're talking about happening between now and November, which is simply taking what's in the Constitution and deciding what we should leave in the Constitution or what should be moved to a transition section within the Constitution. That's all we're going to be doing, and there will not be any changes to policy in those movements. It will not be until after the people have voted to agree or disagree with what the convention does here in step 1, that after November the 4th, will the legislature be able to deal with those step 2 questions that are being asked about what about this or what about this, what tax, what exemption, what policy, whatever. That's a step 2 question. And I think there will be the glory, I think, of this particular process is that we're not taking on all of those individual questions today, because as so many people have said, we don't have time to do that. But also, not only do we not have time to do it, but then you've got to understand what we're going to be leaving in the Constitution and then what we're going to be allowing to go into the transition section for then the future legislators and governors to be able to deal with these step 2 questions appropriately. And I think that's where we really are.
And I understand that, but let me ask you broadly, do you take sort of the same position as Chairman Beaullieu about a lot of the tax provisions in the Constitution would be better in statute?
Yes, but I would also say that doesn't mean that we're automatically going to be taxing food, utilities, and drugs. In my personal opinion, food, utilities, and drugs to protect the poor should be not taxed.
And I agree. I completely agree with him. So
yeah, so I mean,
someone
just
starts
because,
to
So just
But
because
just be-
something is being moved to statute in your mind does not necessarily mean then that you will eventually change that.
Well,
that
exactly.
statute.
Well, that's a very good point, because not only does it mean we might not change it, but to change it is going to require a 2/3 vote. So you're going to have a really high hurdle, a very tough hurdle in this political environment to get to a 2/3 vote. And everybody says, oh, well, there's 2/3 more than 2/3 Republicans, and they get a 2/3 vote on any day of the week. That's not true, because Republicans are not monolithic coming from the same identical districts. I tell people all the time, I won re-election in 2007 as coming from being chairman of the Republican delegation and then becoming the speaker. President Obama carried my district the next year. So my district was light red, if you will, compared to some of the other districts across the state. And so you can't just say by numerical superiority, 2/3 is always going to be there. That's not the case. People have their personal philosophies. People have their constituents to look after. And you got to make a really good case for any particular issue to get to a 2/3 vote.
Okay, we have a process question that someone has dropped in the Q&A. If you take, so they're saying they understand that the idea is to take things out of the Constitution and move it into statute, but does that mean that all of those individual provisions removed from the statute will have to be voted on by the legislature in sort of an individual fashion to put into statute? Is there, like, what is the process once you decide what comes out of the Constitution and gets moved to statute?
Beau, if you let me take this, because you were tied up the other day and weren't privy to a conversation we had with the Attorney General's office. So the thinking today is, again, that in step one, all we're going to be doing is moving within the Constitution, from the constitutional provisions that we're going to leave in the Constitution and those that are going to go into a transition section of the Constitution. That's all that's going to happen within the convention, and the people of this state are going to vote on, did we move the right stuff down or did we not? In one vote, yes, we agree to support what the Constitutional Convention did, or no, we don't. I think that's where the lawyers are going to try to settle out on what's going to happen in November. To get to your question, Melinda, or the individual's question, yes, at that point in time, then if you're going to move something to statute in the step 2 process, it's going to take a vote of the legislature. It's going to take a 2/3 vote on each particular issue, and it's going to take the governor's signature to move it to statute.
Okay, that's a lot of process there.
It is a lot of process. And I think that's the whole purpose of this exercise, is to create a process where we can then in the future look at individual things appropriately and try to fix them where they need to be fixed, where there's a 2/3 agreement amongst legislators, both House and Senate, that they think it needs to be fixed. Right now, we can't get to that, and we're stuck.
Okay, so we have probably a half dozen questions about this same topic, so I'm going to try and sum up. But the gist is, why are legislators being proposed as the delegates, particularly with the angle that the argument is that legislators represent the people because they're elected by the people, but many legislators, it looks like by this person's calculation, 45 out of 105 House members took office without having an election because they were unopposed, as did 18 out of the 39 senators. So people are asking, is it reasonable for legislators to be considered people's representatives as delegates? I'm going to leave that one for Beau as a starting point.
Yeah, look, when someone goes unopposed, it's the will of, and by the way, I had opposition both of my races, so it's the will of that district. There's no one else in that district that wanted to run, or they were popular in that district and were able to be unopposed. So it's the will of each district. If they're not happy with someone represents, they'll have somebody else run. So having opposition or not opposition, he's still representing the people. And I think, we just came into to office for this new term. We were just elected by the people. And even if you want to oppose, you were still elected by your people. It was that was their voice. And I think it's right after an election, fresh in the voters' mind. I think we're the perfect people to be serving as delegates for the convention. To say that we didn't have the trust of the majority of the voters of our districts would be disingenuous. And I think that makes us very, very suitable to be delegates.
I agree with all that. And I go further to say, for those who don't know, this is not the first time it's been done this way. It was done this way in 1993 or 92 or 92, 93, whenever it was, 92. And so this is not something new, but what Beau said is absolutely correct. You're elected to your office, whether there was a vote for you or not. And in my case, I was elected the first time and then ran 2 times without opposition. I've said 1,000 times, not because of me. In my case, it was because of my legislative aide. She was the best ever, and she took care of everybody in the district. But I think that the reality is that we have elected representation as fresh as it can possibly be. The people made their choices to elect their representatives, and this is a role that representatives are clearly cut out to do.
Okay, we have a couple other process questions about how, if something comes out of a convention, how will it appear on the ballot? Obviously, you can't run the whole text of what is being proposed to be moved to statute. So how would it appear before voters? Do they just get one up or down vote? And then a follow-up question, if the reworked constitution is rejected, then what's the next step?
Yeah. So look, 2 things. I mean, we've talked about different variations, but I think we've settled, but obviously the convention has the final say so, but we like a single up or down vote. When you start having different items broken down on the ballot, it can mess up the totality of the Constitution, I believe. And so you have an up or down ballot vote. And I think you can make it very simple. Do you support the new Constitution or not? If it gets voted down, it's business as usual. We're in the same bucket boat we are today, and nothing's changed. And if it gets voted up and is improved, it's status quo. Nothing's changed. So it's just these items in statute now. So either way, our state's going to continue to be run the way it is. It just gives us an opportunity to have broader discussions with those items moved to statute.
Right. Stephen and Melinda, y'all have done studies on this. My recollection was that in the 73 Constitution, it was a single item ballot item, correct? As Beau just said, I support the new Constitution. Yes, I don't know. That would, I think, be the way we want it here. In 92, 93, my recollection going to the poll was that it was a Chinese menu. There were like 8 or 9 different pieces of that puzzle. I think they all failed at the ballot box. My recollection, again, there was not necessarily because of the issues, but the politics at the time were not right for that. But nonetheless, it was a problem. And so is that your recollection, or am I correct on my
I think it might have been both, actually.
Okay.
I think there were some other ones, and then there was a ballot item as well. But I'm just going back and reading from what the Secretary of State has on the website, not actually the ballot itself. So I can't be sure of that.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing, though. I can say this. What happens next if it fails? Budget cuts. We have a constant, back to 1989, boom bust cycle, and we have peaked out after COVID with all the federal money that's come in and that's been spent, and all the economic activity that's caused. All that's going away, and now we're starting to see shrinkage and growth in expenditures and a deficit created, and we're back to square one. To me, if we don't do something like this, we get what we deserve. And I'm tired. I've lost 2 children to out-of-state schools and out-of-state jobs. And we are not going to be able to support higher ed. We haven't supported higher ed the way we should support it now, because so much of the money's tied up in the Constitution. You can't put money toward things like that need additional support, or even reorganization in higher education, if that's what you believe is necessary. So I think we have to do this. I think for me, the fear of not doing it is greater than the fear of doing it, because we're not going to see any economic growth until we can redirect the $41 billion in the budget that's tied up now that we can't get to.
Yeah, look, I want to echo that too, just on Jim's point. I just Googled real quick, poverty by state. And I mean, we are number 3 in the country in poverty by state. And so we have if we keep doing the same things we're doing, we're going to continue having the same issues that we have and continue to be one of the poorest states in the nation. We've got to change the way we do business, and we got to help bring those folks on the bottom up.
Let me ask real quick. There are a couple of questions about ballot propositions and how we change the Constitution. And one asks, is there any thought, or would y'all have thought about or would support something that would allow voters to have direct ballot access either through a referendum, or specifically this question is about empowering the public to make their own constitutional amendments and propose those?
Yeah, so that hasn't come up. I mean, we have the process now with going through the legislature. I mean, I would think the process would continue to be that way, but we haven't brought that. I don't think we would be adding items like that to the Constitution, because we're simply looking at leaving the Constitution the way it is and moving things to statute. So to add that as an additional item, I don't think would be on the table. But I mean, unless somebody has an amendment to House Bill 800 to say, hey, this is something that we're adding, but no one's discussed that.
Yeah, and I follow up with Beau. That's not something that's been contemplated, to my knowledge, by anybody here recently. That issue alone deserves a lot of study. There are states that do it now that are glad they do. There are states that do it now that wish they'd never done it. And I think, before we open something new like that, and of course, and I'll say again, we're not opening anything new in this first step process. If that was something that was going to be discussed, it'd have to come up through the legislative process now as an amendment to the Constitution, to be added after this process is completed. But I don't see that being a part of this discussion at all.
Okay, we also have questions about, and this is probably for Chairman Beaullieu, there are other constitutional amendments that are moving through the legislature right now. So what happens to those? Will they be on the same ballot as potentially a rewritten constitution, or is the legislature going to try to stall some of this? Kind of what's the plan for those?
Yeah, so we've tried to stall most of them in committee. A couple of them have gotten out.
You have been only partially successful.
That's correct. So the authors have all said, I'll say that I don't want to speak for all the authors, but the thought is that if we pass the convention bill, those constitutional amendments would be held in the body and not make it to its final step. We would not want to be amending a constitution or put it, refreshing the Constitution, have that on the ballot with other ballot items, because the two wouldn't be talking and jiving. So I would say you need to have the convention bill, you'd have a constitutional convention on the ballot, or you would have a flood of other amendments like you normally see. I don't think you would have both.
Gotcha. Okay. And do either one of you have an idea of when the Constitutional Convention bill will be debated in the Senate?
We are hoping this week.
Soon.
We only have a couple weeks left of the session, so it seems like y'all would need a committee hearing in the coming days.
I've been on the phone this morning discussing this exact item, so we're hoping that the bill is heard this week.
Yes.
The upcoming week, you mean? Right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And we have quite a few questions about the timing and the speed of this. Somebody asked that they understand why you want it on a presidential election year ballot, but do you really think that you are capable of doing all of this work this quickly? Wouldn't it be better to shoot for the next one in 4 years where there's more time?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a reason why we can't do it now. It's either the delegates, the timing. It's never the perfect time. There's always the wrong reasons why not. We're not rewriting. We're not going to be debating all of the words in the Constitution. That's what takes so much time. The debate will be what stays in the Constitution and what comes out. So, whereas in 73, they had to take a lot of time and go article by article and pay careful attention to every word in the Constitution. We respect those authors so much that we're just moving things to statute, saving us a heck of a lot of time.
Yeah, I would respectfully, I would say, why not now? I mean, we've been at this problem, as I said, for at least in my career, for 35 years. And I don't see any reason why we can't get it done. We're not redrafting the Constitution. We're not changing any words. All we're deciding in the convention in August, after having as much public hearing as we possibly can in June and July, which there's going to be plenty, we're going to be deciding what we want to leave in the Constitution and what we might want to talk about changing sometime in the future. Those decisions are not hard to make, and I'm not worried at all about our ability to get it done. But if we don't try, we'll never know. And if we do try and we don't get it done, what's the problem? I think at the end of the day, now's the perfect time to do it, because we have a new legislature in place and a desire, after having all this bad news come out about Louisiana being 50th and Louisiana being the bottom of the rung, and all these kinds of things that have hit in the last 6 to 9 months, data-wise, coming out of COVID. Now's our chance to get this done, and I think it's really the ideal time to do it.
And this question may be a little premature since the convention bill hasn't passed yet, but several folks are asking about whatever comes out of a convention. How do you educate the public on what they're going to be voting for? What is the public, explanation component that follows a convention? Who will be doing that sort of education? Obviously, I'm confident PAR will be doing some of that, but what are your anticipations about how you will let voters know what comes out of a potential convention?
I think we're just gonna let PAR do it all. How's that?
Yeah, so moved.
No, that's good.
Objection.
Yeah, thanks. We will, and we will, we will do the best job we can, but
Right.
It's going to be very important to educate the public, and so again, it is kind of premature. We haven't even gotten House Bill 800 passed, so we haven't started thinking about what we're going to do after the convention would be successful in having a new version of the Constitution. So we haven't gotten to that point, but it's going to have to be a lot of public outreach.
I believe that many of the delegates will take it. Well, first of all the legislators should take it upon themselves to educate their constituencies through their offices. So that will be one avenue. I think third-party folks like PAR and other groups that have support either parts or all of the outcome will be out there. The members of the governor's transition team and the governor's appointees will all be hitting the circuits. I think I think I'm going to be doing a lot of rubber chicken Rotary lunches between August and November. And I don't have a problem doing that. In fact, I relish the opportunity to do that, because this is the opportunity. This is what we need to be doing to talk about changing this state and changing its trajectory. And why not now? Why not?
We have a question about, so Articles 3 and 4, which involve the legislative branch and the executive branch, are listed as off the table for discussion. But Article 5, parts of it are still going to be allowed for debate in the convention. Is there a reason that the judicial branch is being treated differently in terms of the convention?
So I would say, if you look at the different articles, the legislative and executive branches are pretty straightforward. It's judicial branch is much more complex article in the Constitution, and so there may be some things in there that we need to look at. But it's not like there's a particular reason. I mean, Jim, do you have anything else to offer on that?
Only the things that I've heard the governor talk about, the desire to create specialty courts, and some of that is mired in the Constitution that prohibits us from creating veterans courts or drug courts or some of the other things that we need clarification to potentially massage a piece of the Constitution in Article 5 that would be moved to the transition to allow those kinds of things to happen. But otherwise, I don't think it's going to be one of the major items.
All right, let me ask one sort of last question. I think it's not one of these tough but fair questions that I like it. This is a largely Republican-backed convention. Not completely, but mostly Republican-backed. Is making the Constitution shorter and less restrictive, and thus making the government bigger and more powerful, a conservative choice? I'll let it up to the two Republicans who stayed on our panel for us. So you're going to be less limiting.
Actually, you'd be making the Constitution smaller. It'd be opposite of what that says. So I mean, you'd be putting more things in the statute and less in the Constitution, which I would say would potentially restrict the size of government. I don't say that's a bad word.
A limit.
It would limit. It would limit because it's in the Constitution. So I think it's opposite of that. And I don't look at this as a Republican or Democrat. I mean, we do have super majorities in both sides of it, but that's just the state of Louisiana politics right now. So I don't see it that way at all.
I agree. I agree with that. The Constitution is for everyone, and whatever we do in this constitutional convention, it's my sincere hope that whatever we do will benefit all people of this state. And I think we all have to go into that, be it Republican, Democrat, Independent, or whatever party, recognizing that the Constitution is for everyone, and that we need to make sure that all people have the best opportunity to live their lives freely and with opportunity here in this state, the way they choose to do. And I think that's where we hope the Constitution ends up.
Thank y'all so much. I really appreciate your time. I want to end just thanking y'all. I'll let everyone know that whatever comes out, if something comes out, PAR will definitely be there to try and educate the public as much as possible. I'll be hitting those same chicken dinner Rotary luncheons as much as possible. Thank y'all again. Thank for all the questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to them. I knew we weren't going to get to them. There's a lot of questions here, but that does not mean that we will not continue to get them answered. And I think there'll be opportunities for both Jim and the other people pushing it, and as well as Chairman Beaullieu, to try and address those as much as possible. I ask everyone to still stay informed and engaged on this. Thank y'all again. Just so everyone know, this will be on our YouTube channel for every people that want to watch, or if you want to share that, as well as that infographic. We're going to post that as soon as this thing is over. Thank y'all again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.